Welcome to Heart Mindify. Before we start the show, just a reminder to share, rate, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it. And please give us a 5-star rating. It helps us beat the big tech algorithms.
I'm John Izzy. Change can be difficult for a lot of us, but when we understand what makes us tick, we develop a better understanding of who we are and begin a journey of discovering our best self. Join me for a free session at johnizzy.com.
And I'm Kim Cordy, creator of the Emotion Chef Framework, an emotion management tool. Thoughts drive emotions, and emotions drive thoughts, but it's our emotions that drive our decisions and behaviors. Find out more at kimcordy.com.
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Knowing each other personally and socially for the past 10 years, Kim and John have joined forces, bringing years of experience and training, providing a platform for growth and personal development, along with a little humor. John is the heart, Kim is the mind, and together they are Heart Mindify. Hello, Kim. It's been a busy week here for me, but I'm feeling pretty good. How are you?
I'm okay. I will say you have been busy almost every week now. I think that's really, really good.
Well, it's not producing any cash, but yes, you're right. It is good.
Yeah.
Well, it's producing some.
Well, I'm super happy for you. It's been challenging for me lately, but as my grandmother would always say, I would complain, but it wouldn't do any good. Nobody was going to listen. I think you might agree with me. I think that complaining is getting worse.
Ugh.
It's bad enough on social media. You listen to any news interview, it's like people are complaining about this or that, and it's everywhere. It's just so ramped up.
You're 100% correct. In fact, I was thinking about this the other day. If I complained as much as people are doing today, and maybe I'm part of that complaining too, I have to think about that. But if I complained as a child, like many people are doing today, my mother would look at me like I lost my mind. In fact, she would probably say something like, "Stop complaining or I will give you something to complain about." But her point was to simply
Sounds like
explain yourself.
I was just going to say, it sounds like a typical Italian mother, right?
Exactly. But, her point was to just simply explain yourself without complaining. That's hard to do.
It can be, right? I know that if my grandmother was alive, or even when she was alive, she never, ever, ever watched Monty Python's Flying Circus, which I was addicted to. It was so funny. All of those skits were just hysterical. Some of them were quite weird. And if no one's ever seen them, I suggest you go to YouTube and see some of them. They've got TV shows and movies. But there was one skit that sticks out in my mind, and it's about a complaints department, right? It's where you go to make your complaint. And this guy enters in to the office of the complaints manager. And the complaints manager, who's Eric Idle, is sitting there with his feet up on the desk, staring at his shoes as the man exclaims, "I've got a complaint." I'm going to try it with an English accent.
You're doing good. Keep going.
Thank you. Then the complaints manager says, "You've got a complaint. I just bought these shoes 3 weeks ago, and look at them. They're already worn through." And the guy goes, "Well, I want to complain about," and he goes, "If you complain, nothing happens, so you might as well not bother. My back hurts and my la la la." He goes on complaining, and the guy turns around and just slams the door. That really kind of epitomizes complaining, don't you think? Everyone wants to be heard. And sometimes instead of listening to the complainer, we start to think about our own complaints. I know one person in particular. You can talk about anything, complain, even an experience. But if you say, oh, my feet are killing me, she'll say, oh, my feet are hurting worse because I've got these bunions and I've got this and I've got that. Makes me nuts.
Oh, yeah, I totally get it. First of all, I got to say, what a great show.
Right.
I'm getting to the point now in life where not many people are aware of Monty Python.
Right.
So
They were crazy
talented.
talent. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I'm getting so old. Anyway, I digress. This reminds me this reminds me of a Turkish proverb which says, "Listen 100 times, ponder 1,000, speak once." When you were talking, these three sentences or these three questions came to mind. Are you listening to me? Do you understand what I'm saying? And are you really listening to me? If I have to ask you this question outside of a classroom, then to me, what I'm conveying to you is nothing more than a complaint. But we do it all the time. But why?
Well, maybe it has to do with the complainer. They
Ah,
complain so much and so often that it just becomes white noise. And people just start to ignore them. They're like, oh, they're just complaining again. Complaining, by definition, is to express your pain, resentment, your grief, your uneasiness. It's also a way to find fault or make a formal accusation. In summary, you are dissatisfied in some aspect of your life and you complain about it.
yep.
So, really, nobody's complaining about a positive thing. I have never heard someone say, oh, I wish I just wasn't so physically fit. Oh, I can afford to buy this and oh, it's so awful. And oh, my partner, they do so many things for me. You don't hear that. You hear the aches, the pains, what you don't have money for, all the things your partner doesn't do. So complaining is really about focusing on the negative that's going on. And if we have a lot of negative focus, we can turn into chronic complainers. Of course, complaining has its place, right? If a movie stinks or service was bad or something wasn't right or you were somewhat dissatisfied, that makes sense. You complain to someone or it's not uncommon to complain. But it's
Right.
the people who are rarely satisfied that turn into chronic complainers. And you know how enjoyable they are to be around, right?
Oh, yeah. It's funny because the greatest complainers of all time will find fault in anything. I have a good friend who's just like this. Even on a beautiful day, he will find something to complain about. It literally drives me crazy to the point where it's now a joke or he's completely ignored.
Yeah, it's almost like they've got a master's in complaining, right? It's like they've
Yeah.
studied and they've got the art of complaining down, that they do it and they don't even have to think about it. They just are on automatic complaint. But then there are people who are venters, right? So there's just,
Hmm.
it's still in the complaint world. It's not the necessarily the chronic complainer, but there's the people who vent. And if you think about a vent, it's an outlet for air, like the vents in your house. It's an outlet for air or for smoke fumes or smells. If you think about it, it could be a volcano. You see the venting, the smoke comes out because it's letting go of gases. Emotional steam is what happens when people vent, they let it go. So you see this displayed in the forms of like anger, frustration, disappointment. A lot of times this is done when people have an agenda or want to get attention. Now, sometimes it's just to let something go, but there are, once again, those who want attention. So if they're angry, you're automatically going to say, well, why are you so angry? Then they proceed to tell you, discount any advice that you would give them and propose their own solution. Happens a lot. So why did they vent to you in the first place? They weren't really looking for solutions, only validation and attention. So it's kind of like going to the complaints department and then playing both roles. There's no need to involve anyone else, truly, but you still have that need to vent.
You know, you're right. And venting is a tricky one. Like you said, venting is a release of emotion. Generally, it's better to let things out, right, than to hold them in. And
I
doing
agree.
so, yeah, and doing so feels almost akin to problem solving, in the moment at least. Venting your frustration does alleviate tension and stress. You almost always feel better after sharing your frustrations with others. However, when this venting is confined to self vindicating messages, and what I mean by that is to clear yourself from guilt or accusations, to provide justification for something that you're doing, then it can easily turn into self limiting behavior, which can and often does lead to victimhood. When what's really called for is actively behaving in ways that could potentially rectify the situation. Venting, if not checked, can be an excuse for not acting to resolve a problem or confront an issue that requires confrontation.
Yeah, you would think that complaining would make people feel better, but it doesn't always, according to a study.
Mm-mm.
The study that I read is called Saying is Experiencing Effective Consequences of Complaining and Affirmation, that was published in 2009. So, effective means having to do with our emotions, not effective, it's
Right.
affective. So, think of it as your emotions. The phrase saying is experiencing is perfect in that every time we complain in our head or to others, we strengthen that complaint in our brain. Because what do I always say?
Neurons
Neurons that fire together, wire
wire
together.
together.
Exactly. So we're just laying down deeper wiring and it's going to come faster and quicker because we keep saying it over and over. They found in 3 of the 4 experiments that they conducted that the mood decreased not only for the complainer, but for everyone who listened. We
Mm.
know that moods are contagious and we can catch someone's mood unless we are mindfully taking action to stop it.
Kim, that's so true. And there are also instances where complaining can be beneficial. Let's
Very
say
true.
something is bothering us and we share it with someone who in turn gives us affirmation for our complaint or sympathy, maybe. That is the value of letting off steam because we are letting it go. But the opposite of that can compromise your health, your physical, mental, and even your emotional health. Venting can also help to restore your body's equilibrium, so it can be a good thing. Let me give you an example. Most of you know that I work with abused kids. One of the kids that I worked with a few years ago would get extremely overwhelmed with emotions and would complain and vent all the time. But here's the interesting thing. After he vented, he would be exhausted and have to go lay down. What he was experiencing by venting and sleeping was a restoration in his body's equilibrium. And I explained it to him this way. I gave him a balloon. We keep balloons on our bikes to give to the kids. And I told him to blow it up all the way until it busted. After some laughter, I gave him another one and I said, do the same thing, but stop at the very end before it bust. He did, but he looked at me kind of strangely. And then I asked him to tell me one thing that he wanted to vent to me about, but it could only be one thing. He did, and then I asked him to let out a little bit more air and then stop. Tell me one more thing. He did, and we repeated it until there was almost no air in the balloon. I asked him how he felt, and he said, I feel fine, and his mood showed it too. So we talked for a few minutes about what happens when we vent so much that it bursts the balloon at once. But if we talk about things as they happen and vent, then the balloon never bursts and we retain control and our body doesn't get out of equilibrium. Even though venting all at once helps to restore your equilibrium, controlled venting maintains the equilibrium in your body. When you control your venting, it is more likely to be validated by others. But a continual explosion of venting causes everyone to run away, which can leave you exhausted with no positive outcome and no one listening to you. So, my suggestion is vent when you need to, not when you can't hold it in anymore and you are forced to vent. Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. You know me, I'm all about the body budget.
Yeah.
And right. And this is a perfect example. First of all, sympathy feels good. So just the act of letting it out, it does help us find perspective.
Hmm.
And this saying it even out loud, or it could give us the courage to find some sort of resolution. And so your advice to that young boy was great. It's like, find the resolution now. Because when you are in that situation, you're putting yourself in a negative body budget situation. That's why he was so tired. It's because he
Hmm.
was kind of letting it all out, and he was just like, oh, he just let go of things that were vented up inside of him. I mean, that was great, great, great advice. The opportunity that you were hoping that he would take and that it would produce was that when you complain or you vent into someone on a careful basis, then you are doing it and having an opportunity to maybe, as you said, make a change, or they can give you a perspective or their life experience that not only makes you feel better, but it helps you. Where we get into trouble is seeking out another person to complain yet again. So if the little boy vented to you, and then vented to his mom, and then vented to his grandmother, and then vented to his friend, and then vented, did the rounds venting on the same issue or issues, this becomes an addiction almost in the act of complaining and not in the finding of a solution. It's kind of like
Absolutely.
it's kind of like a cow chewing a cud, right?
Hmm.
We never digest and eliminate because we're mentally chewing it all of the time.
Yep.
So this is kind of similar to what you said to the boy, is what Andrew says, or maybe it is a little similar, maybe not, but Andrew always says, if you are not a part of the solution, then you are a part of the problem.
I agree with Andrew so much.
Right? He's so wise. That's why I
I
love
know,
him so
right?
much.
Yep.
I do love
But
him.
but the thing is, what does it mean to be part of the solution, though? Being part of the solution is harder, right? It's easier to complain instead of fixing the problem. The key is to find solutions to things that we complain about. Here's another interesting proverb I heard. Instead of complaining, and I love this, instead of complaining that the rose bush is full of thorns, be happy the thorn bush has roses. Why do we gravitate toward the negative instead of being marveled by the sight of the beautiful rose?
Well, I could go on and on and on, as you well know, about automatic negative thoughts and the fact that our brains are created to protect us. And so that's why we go to the negative. But in a paper written, and I am going to murder this, I am so sorry to this professor because I don't know how to pronounce Polish names, first or last or any. His name is Maciej, I think, Kowaleski. I'm going to go with that. And I
Good
apologize
try.
if I
I don't
said
know
it
if
wrong.
that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's good for now. And if anybody wants this study, they can contact me. I'm happy to give it to them. But he's a professor and director at the Institute of Sociology at this university that I can't even begin to pronounce. Like, I looked at it and I'm like, I'm not going to even try, in Poland. And he discusses the topic dissatisfied and critical citizens, the political effect of complaining. In another paper I read on complaining that was also out of Poland, they kind of indicated that complaining is very popular in Poland. And I think that's just their perspective. I would argue it's everywhere. That said, in his paper, he wrote about the difference between inactive complaining and complaining aimed at making a change, which is what you were talking about.
Hmm.
The article was focused on political change, but in every form of complaint, we can either be active, creating a solution, or at least trying to, or remain inactive. He wrote, I'm quoting him here in English, the inactive complaint is not only autoletic, which means having an end or a purpose in itself, driven by some internal purpose. Remember what I was talking about, like the person who complained because they just wanted attention but didn't really want a resolution,
Yeah, yeah.
or ritualistic. But also, one refers to the local negative discourse or lack of alternative to the existing authority that hinders all activity. And two is uttered by constantly discontented people who are either inclined to complain, malcontents, or ritually criticize local authorities. It's a habit. So, what he is saying is that we can be habitual complainers, which we see from the other study has a negative impact on ourselves and the others that we complain to. So, the other side of the inactive complainer is that what we complain about can be treated as unmovable, a permanent obstacle that cannot be overcome. Why is it permanent and unmovable? Because we keep complaining about it. So it's like it can't change because of the constant complaining.
It never goes away.
Yeah. It's so how can I change it? I can't change it. So I just, by not changing it, it's permanent.
Yep.
The professor may have been discussing political complaints in his article, but this is applied to everyday chronic complaining. And if we view our complaints as unmovable and permanent, this hinders real change in our lives. It makes us powerless and prone to more complaining.
That sounds so interesting, and I would have to agree with him so much. And I'm also going to have to read the article, so you're going to have to give me the name of the
Share
guy,
it
but
with
you're
him.
going to have to write it down so I
Hey,
can actually
no,
see it to put
let
it
me
into
just
the
send you the
Google search.
link. The
Sounds
link
good.
is so much easier.
Love it. One of the things that come to mind at this point goes back to what my mother used to say. Stop complaining or I'll give you something to complain about, right? What she was actually saying is, why not do something more productive with your time instead of complaining?
Yes, and they actually have a term for it because, they have terms for everything,
Oh,
right?
yes. Yeah.
Because they're not a term for everything. And the phrase is called an instrumental complaint. I am not saying that you play music as you complain or turn the complaint into a song and sing it as you complain. No, but rather use the complaint as an instrument or means of change. Look for the source of the problem and offer suggestions and create a plan. How different would that feel? Imagine the feeling of something being stuck, immovable. No matter how hard you push it, it's something you don't want, it's in your way, and you push and it never moves. But if you figure out how you can move it, it's relieving.
Oh, yeah. It would make a huge difference. One of the things I do, and one of the things I ask my clients that are complainers to do is make a gratitude list. It sounds weird, but it's proven that the habit of gratitude can reduce the symptoms of depression while increasing your well being or simply being a happier person. So start creating a gratitude list by writing down all the things you are grateful for and add to it daily. You will find that it is difficult to complain as much or feel sad or sorry for yourself when you're feeling grateful.
Right, because as we talked about earlier, happy people don't complain,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
We are geared to focus on the negative. So if we are mindful and focus, differently, think about it. What if you're in a restaurant and you have a bad experience? What if you have a bad experience with your partner or at work? Complaints can make a way for improvement if done correctly. So while yes, you should have gratitude, you should focus on the positive, but you could still give feedback where it's warranted, where it truly is negative. So being positive all the time is, I think I've said this before, that's not the way to go. Like being positive isn't necessarily healthy if you ignore the negative. But if you see the negative and it bothers you, if you give feedback or the solution, like Andrew was saying, be part of the solution, it can be a combination of both, right?
Agreed. And I want to go back to your question about the restaurant. What do you do at the restaurant if you have a bad experience? It's easier to point out the negative, and we do it all the time, sometimes without even thinking about it. But it's much harder to point out the positive. So instead of complaining to the manager that the server was slow, acknowledge the amount of tables and big parties she has and suggests that when there are bigger tables that require more attention, it would be helpful for the server to attend to the needs of the bigger tables and ask another server to help with the smaller ones. This would help address the needs of the smaller tables and still provide good service for the larger tables. Here, everybody wins.
We get so focused on our experience that we sometimes or often don't look at the whole picture, what's going on. And this is where mindfulness helps us out. This is a great example of how feedback can be productive.
Yep.
And so you're saying to the person, this didn't work, and this is my observation of why. And the thing is, a restaurant could be situational, and you don't go to that restaurant all the time. But at work and at home, having those conversations is important. So I think what I'm trying to stress today is that even if your complaint is valid, which it could be, especially in work and home, it's really how you handle the complaint or how much you dwell on it that's impactful to you as a being.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said earlier, I always go back to the body budget and the impact of constant complaining on our budget. It puts us in that fight or flight. Like, you may not notice it like you would if someone was pointing a gun at you, but your body is in that fight or flight mode.
Mm-hmm.
And it impacts the budget of those around you. So seeing things from a different perspective, it's good idea. Seeking out the perspective of someone else is a good idea. Taking action to find a resolution is a good idea. And being open to hearing a different way of resolving the issue is a good idea. And why I say you have to have a conversation, because when it is in an arena where that behavior would be repeated often, i.e., at work or at home or with friends, it's having the conversation, which you think might be very hard because we project, right?
Mm-hmm.
We make up crap in our head all the time. Like, oh yeah, they're never going to listen to what I have to say. So we've already had the conversation and the end of the resolution before the conversation's taken place. But if we use what we talked about in our conversation podcast that I call it the conversation ball, is that you allow someone to talk and listen. And whether you have a real ball or a pretend ball, you're holding the ball and receiving what they have to say and absorbing it and then thinking on it and then responding. And then the other person has to hold the ball because they're going to receive the information. And that it will help you to take care or resolve the complaints that you have that could very well be real.
That's interesting. I like that.
For me, I find perspective by asking myself, when I'm on my deathbed, is this something that's really important to me? Like, if I complain about something that's important to me that isn't important to someone else, isn't that my problem?
Hmm.
Right? Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not important to them. So I'm complaining about something that isn't important to them. So if it's important to me, I should take care of it. So that's one of the things that I think about. Like, how important is this to me? How's it important to the overall relationship or what's going on? And maybe it isn't worth complaining about, whether it's to myself or others. And what I really like about doing the work I do, the Emotion Chef, or doing this podcast, is that it makes me think and highlights for me my own behaviors and triggers some changes I need to make. So this isn't just for the audience. This is for me. This is for you.
Oh,
And I think,
absolutely.
it's because my kind of common thing that I do is that after I hear a complaint, I will chime in with my own story. And I think it's because I'm commiserating over a shared or similar experience. But by doing that, I'm just reliving in my brain a negative experience and reinforcing the experience of the complainer, right? That's that neuronal wiring. So
Yep.
after doing this show and really kind of reinforcing the thoughts behind what we've been talking about, the next time I'm going to respond differently and perhaps ask how they can become an instrumental complainer. And of course, depending on the situation, I might just say, you've got nothing to complain about. but
Which is usually the case.
yeah, right. But just one last thought. If the problem is truly unmovable, it's really beneficial for you. Let's going back to the impact of negative thoughts and emotions on our physical being. If we can find a positive aspect to it or acceptance around it, then this is the best course, in my opinion. And I'm going to quote Benjamin Franklin, who quoted someone else. He got a lot of credit for something that he didn't originate, but he wrote, "Nothing is certain except for death and taxes." The fact is, we have no control over others. We like to think we do, but we don't. But what we do have control over is our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors. So focus on what you can control and work with that, and then direct it in a way that is productive.
Yeah, and lead by experience, right? Because if you are friends with a chronic complainer or someone that complains a lot, and they see you taking control of your own situations and not complaining, then they might think twice about complaining because they see you doing such a good job. It's just a thought. Look, I like that quote too. And I think today's topic was awesome. Practicing gratitude, praising others, focusing on success, letting go, taking responsibility, taking action, making a plan, exercising are all activities that can keep us focused on happiness. That doesn't mean we do not discount the negative, but our focus is on the positive, not the negative. Again, going back to the proverb from earlier, instead of complaining that the rose bush is full of thorns, be happy the thorn bush has roses. But moving forward, I want to focus on the motivations behind the things we do. So next week, we are going to discuss what makes you tick. In other words, why do you do the things you do? Because if we don't understand the motivation behind the behavior, then making a change will never stick. Replacing a good habit with a bad habit is still a habit. But understanding the motivation behind the bad habit will help you choose a behavior that is better for you and not just a replacement.
Exactly. Goes back to control.
Yeah.
We have choices.
We do.
I like it, John.
Yeah, sounds good. So listen, everybody, thank you all so much for listening to today's podcast
Yes, thank you.
and spending a part of your day with us. It really does mean a lot to Kim and I both, and I just want to thank you. Kim, have a great week.
You too, John.
All right, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
New shows are available every Saturday right here on heartmindify.podbean.com or wherever you listen. Kim and I would like to thank each and every one of you for allowing us to be a small part of your life. Be kind to yourself and remember, our hearts tell the story, but our mind is the conductor.